The air in the courtroom was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and shattered promises. On one side sat Nathan Harrington, a titan of industry whose net worth eclipsed the GDP of small nations. His victory was assured, his expression a mask of bored impatience. On the other, his wife of 15 years, Genevieve looked small and defeated, her future about to be decided by the stroke of a pen. The judge, weary from the week's proceedings, cleared her throat, the divorce papers ready. "It is the decision of this court," she began. But she never finished. Because in that final, desperate moment, Genevieve reached into her handbag, her hand not trembling, and pulled out a single, folded document. A document that would not just redefine her future, but shatter a dynasty. It was a prenuptial agreement. And at the bottom, next to her own, was a signature Nathan Harrington would soon swear he'd never made, protecting a secret he'd kill to keep buried. The silence that fell over the New York County Supreme Courthouse was a physical thing. It pressed down on the polished oak tables, muted the distant wail of a city siren, and sucked the air from Nathan Harrington's lungs. The only sound was the faint, crisp unfolding of aging paper in Genevieve Harrington's hands. Judge Audrey Thompson. A woman whose face had been carved by decades of witnessing human fallibility, blinked. She lowered the pen she'd been holding over the final dissolution decree. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, her voice dangerously neutral. "What is that?" "It's our prenuptial agreement." "Your Honor," Genevieve said. Her voice, which had been a timid whisper for the past 3 days, was suddenly clear and resonant. It wasn't loud, but it filled the room. Across the aisle, Nathan's lawyer, a pin-striped predator named Mr. Corbin, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a desperate last-minute fabrication. It has been established and agreed upon by both parties that no such document exists." He gestured dismissively toward Genevieve. "My client was more than generous in his proposal. A proposal Mrs. Harrington was ready to accept not 5 minutes ago. Nathan himself hadn't moved a muscle. He was staring at the pale blue linen blend paper in Genevieve's hands. He recognized it. A cold dread, an alien feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a child, afraid of the dark, began to crawl up his spine. It couldn't be. He had destroyed it. Personally. With his own 2 hands, he had burned the only existing copy in the fireplace of his study 15 years ago, the night after their wedding. "It does exist, Mr. Corbin," Genevieve said, her eyes fixed on the judge. "My husband seems to have forgotten its existence, as he has forgotten so many things." She stood, her movements graceful and deliberate, and approached the bench. Her simple navy dress, which had seemed mournful and plain moments before, now looked like armor. She placed the document before the clerk, who slid it carefully toward Judge Thompson. The judge put on her reading glasses, her expression unreadable. The room held its breath. The document was surprisingly simple, not the phone book thick tome of legalese one might expect. It was barely 5 pages long. Nathan finally found his voice. It was a low growl. "Genevieve, what is this? This is insane. Stop this ridiculous game." She turned to face him, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch from his gaze. The fear was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. "It's no game, Nathan. It's a promise we made, a contract." Judge Thompson looked up, her gaze sharp and penetrating. She peered over her glasses, first at a visibly sweating Nathan, then at his thunderstruck lawyer. "Mr. Corbin," the judge said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This document, dated May 12, 2010, appears to bear the legitimate signatures of both your client, Mr. Nathan Harrington, and the petitioner, Miss Genevieve Parker, as she was then known. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It also bears the signature of a witness. Corbin stammered, a forgery. Your Honor. Clearly a forgery. We will bring in experts, handwriting analysts. That may be Judge Thompson conceded, her eyes narrowing. But I am more interested in Clause 4B. She looked directly at Nathan, whose face had gone from tanned and confident to a sickly pale white. A clause I suggest you refresh your memory on Mr. Harrington. It states that in the event of a marital dissolution resulting from, and I quote, an act of profound personal betrayal including but not limited to infidelity, all assets, properties, and holdings acquired prior to the marriage remain with their original owner. Corbin scoffed. Well, that's standard boilerplate, Your Honor. My client is the sole earner. The assets acquired prior were his. Please allow me to finish, Mr. Corbin. The judge snapped, her patience gone. It continues. With one exception, a 51% controlling interest in Harrington Innovations, the entity foundational to the couple's subsequent financial success, shall be transferred to Ms. Parker. The rationale, as written here, is that this entity was a partnership of vision, and its potential was unlocked through joint support and sacrifice during the foundational years of the marriage. The room erupted in gasps. Corbin's jaw hung open. Harrington Innovations wasn't just some pre-marital asset. It was the seed from which the entire Harrington global empire had grown. It was the tech startup Nathan had poured his heart and soul into before he met Genevieve, the one that developed the revolutionary logistics software that became the engine of his billion-dollar machine. It was his baby, his legacy. To lose a controlling interest in it would be more than a financial blow. It would be an amputation. Nathan shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. That's a lie. A complete and utter fabrication. She faked this. That is not my signature. His voice boomed, the voice of a man used to absolute command. But underneath it was a new raw note of panic. Genevieve simply stood her ground, her hands clasped calmly behind her back. Judge Thompson banged her gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot. Sit down, Mr. Harrington. You will maintain decorum in my court. He sank back into his chair, his face a mask of purple rage. He looked at Genevieve. Truly looked at her, and the woman he saw was not the pliable, gentle creature he had decided to discard. He saw a stranger, a strategist who had just checkmated him in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Your Honor, Genevieve said, her voice steady. I have proof of the signature's authenticity, and I have proof of the infidelity. She gestured to her own lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man named Robert Chen, who had been watching the proceedings with the patient stillness of a heron. He stood and opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out a single file. He began placing thick, neatly bound dossiers on the table, one after another. There were 5 of them. Each one bore the name of a different woman. The sound of paper had started the earthquake. The sight of those dossiers was the tsunami that was about to wash Nathan Harrington's world away. The story of the prenup began not with lawyers, but with champagne and starlight. 15 years earlier, Genevieve Parker was a doctoral candidate in art history, working part-time at a gallery in Soho. Her life was a comfortable academic world of research, dusty books, and the quiet thrill of discovering the story behind a forgotten masterpiece. Nathan Harrington crashed into that world like a meteor. He was the gallery's biggest patron, a charismatic force of nature who was already a legend in the tech and finance worlds at 35. He wasn't just rich, he was dynamic, intelligent, and possessed a laser-focused attention that made anyone he spoke to feel like the only person in the universe. One evening during a private showing, he bypassed the fawning gallery owner and walked directly to Genevieve, who was nervously explaining the provenance of a minor impressionist piece to a potential buyer. "Tell me something the plaque doesn't," he'd said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. For the next hour he listened, truly listened, as she spoke with passion about brushstrokes, about the artist's desperate letters to his brother, about the hidden symbolism in the choice of a wilting flower. He wasn't interested in the painting as an investment. He was captivated by the story and by the storyteller. The courtship was a whirlwind. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons, private tours of the Met, after hours dinners in Paris. To a woman whose biggest thrill was finding a rare book. It was intoxicating. He loved her mind, he said. He loved that she wasn't like the other women in his circle. Women whose ambitions were measured in carats and square footage. He called her his still point in a turning world. Her friends were wary. Her closest friend, Sarah Jenkins, a sharp-witted public defender, was the most vocal. "Jen, the man's a shark," she'd said over coffee one afternoon. Sharks don't change their nature just because they admire a dolphin. Genevieve had dismissed it as cynicism. She was in love. The topic of a prenuptial agreement came up a month before the wedding. It was Nathan who raised it, of course. He did it with practiced ease, framing it as a mere formality, a piece of responsible estate planning. "It's for the lawyers." "Jen." "Not for us," he'd said. Sitting in the sprawling living room of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. "It just protects what's mine before we marry, and what's yours." A clean slate. His lawyers, led by a younger but no less predatory Mr. Corbin, drafted a document that was as cold and brutal as a corporate takeover. It stipulated that in case of divorce, Genevieve would receive a lump sum payment, generous by any normal standard, but a pittance compared to the fortune she would be helping him build. It waived her rights to any claim on his business's present or future. Sarah, whom Genevieve had asked to review it, was appalled. "This isn't a prenup, Jen. It's an exit strategy. His exit strategy. You're signing away your life. He's building a cage and asking you to help weld the door shut." Tearfully, Genevieve confronted Nathan. She didn't want a fortune, but she didn't want to feel like a temporary employee either. She spoke of partnership, of building a life together. This was where Nathan showed his genius for manipulation. He feigned hurt, then understanding. He looked at her with those devastatingly sincere eyes and told her she was right. "You're right," he'd said, taking her hands. "This document, it's cold. It's Corbin's work. It doesn't reflect what we are." He then walked over to his desk. "Let's make our own, a real one, a promise between you and me." He pulled out 2 sheets of his personal stationery, the thick, creamy paper with the pale blue tint. "Forget the lawyers," he said, with a conspiratorial smile. "Let's write something that matters." He handwrote a new agreement. It was simple, full of the romantic, collaborative language she'd used. He included the standard clauses about protecting premarital assets. But then he added a new one. Clause 4B. He presented it to her as his ultimate act of faith. Harrington Innovations. He explained, "That's my past. That's the foundation. Everything I build from now on with you by my side will be ours. But if I ever break my promise to you, if I betray you, then the foundation itself becomes yours. Because you will have been the co-architect of everything that came after. It was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. It wasn't about money. It was about principle. It was an acknowledgement of her value beyond the dollar sign. There's a witness clause. She'd noted her heart soaring. Of course. He buzzed his intercom. Elias. Could you come in for a moment? Elias Foster entered the room. He was Nathan's right-hand man, a quiet older gentleman who had been with Nathan from the very beginning. He was more mentor than employee, the steady hand that had guided Nathan through the rocky early years of his first company. Elias had a kind, weary face, and he looked at Genevieve with genuine affection. Elias, my friend, Nathan said warmly. Genevieve and I are just signing a private agreement, a little promise for our future. We'd be honored if you'd witness it. Elias smiled. Of course, Nate. They each signed the 2 identical handwritten copies. Genevieve signed Genevieve Parker. Nathan signed his full looping signature. Elias signed below them. One for you, one for me, Nathan said, handing a copy to Genevieve. He held up the other. And this one is just for us. The next day, Genevieve took her copy to be notarized and then placed it in a secure deposit box, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. She told Sarah what had happened, how Nathan had understood completely. Sarah had remained skeptical. I hope you're right, Jen. I really do. But keep that document safe and get a copy of the notarization. The wedding was a fairy tale. On their wedding night, as they stood by the fireplace in their new home, Nathan poured them 2 glasses of vintage scotch. He held up his copy of the agreement. To our promise, he said, his voice husky. No lawyers, no outsiders. Just us. And with a flourish, he tossed the document into the roaring fire. Genevieve watched the pale blue paper curl, blacken, and turn to ash. She felt a momentary pang of unease. But then he kissed her, and she told herself it was a symbolic act, a gesture that proved they would never need it. He trusted her that much. What she didn't know was that the act was not symbolic. It was tactical. He believed hers was the only other copy in existence, and he was confident that over the years, through household moves, through the blissful complacency of marriage, it would be lost, forgotten, or misplaced. He had just created the perfect illusion of fairness, while ensuring the brutal corporate prenup drafted by Corbyn remained the only one his legal team had on file, the one he would default to if this ever ended. He had built the cage and convinced her it was a castle. For 15 years, Genevieve had lived in that castle. She'd hosted his dinners, charmed his business partners, raised their 2 children, and slowly, piece by piece, let her own ambitions and identity fade into the background, becoming Mrs. Nathan Harrington. The vibrant art historian was now just a and partner, the still point he'd wanted. And she never, ever forgot where she had put that piece of paper. The courtroom's adjournment felt less like a pause and more like the frantic scramble for high ground before a flood. The moment Judge Thompson called a recess for 1 week to allow both sides to prepare for a formal hearing on the prenup's validity, the Harrington war machine roared to life. Nathan, his face a thunderous mask, stormed out of the courtroom, flanked by a phalanx of lawyers. He didn't look at Genevieve. He barked into his phone before the heavy doors had even swung shut. Get me everything. I want her life taken apart piece by piece. I want to know what she ate for breakfast in 3rd grade. I want every ex-boyfriend, every disgruntled friend, every financial misstep. dig. And use the A-Team. The A-Team was his euphemism for a ruthless private investigations firm known for its ability to manufacture scandal where none existed. For Nathan, truth was a commodity, and he was prepared to spend millions to create his own version of it. Mr. Corbin cornered Robert Chen in the hallway. The contrast was stark. Corbin, tall, aggressive, impeccably tailored. Chen, of average height in a slightly rumpled suit, holding a worn leather briefcase. "You've made a grave error," Chen Corbin hissed, his voice low and menacing. "This stunt will backfire spectacularly. That document is a laughable forgery, and we will prove it. When we do, we will countersue your client for fraud, and you for malicious prosecution. You'll be disbarred before you can even file an appeal." Chen adjusted his glasses. "The document is authentic, Mr. Corbin, and my client's claims are substantiated. I suggest you advise your own client to prepare for a negotiation based on the terms outlined within it." Corbin laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Negotiate. We are going to obliterate you. By the time we're done, Mrs. Harrington won't be able to afford a bus ticket out of this city." The first salvo was fired 2 days later. A sleazy online tabloid one, known to be a favored outlet for Nathan's PR team, to leak damaging stories about rivals, ran a front-page story. The headline screamed, "Jilted Wife's Forgery Plot." Genevieve Harrington's desperate attempt to forge prenup after affair with younger man. The story was a masterwork of insinuation and half-truths. It painted Genevieve as a vindictive gold digger who, upon learning Nathan was leaving her, conspired to fake the document. It included grainy photos of her having lunch with her cousin, a man 10 years her junior, framed to look like a clandestine romantic rendezvous. It even quoted an anonymous source close to the family, likely a maid or driver paid handsomely for a fabricated quote, who spoke of Genevieve's erratic behavior and lavish spending in the months leading up to the divorce. The attack was surgical. It was designed to poison the well, to paint her as an unreliable, immoral actor in the court of public opinion before she ever had a chance to present her case in a court of law. The phone calls started immediately. The private school where their children, 12-year-old Olivia and 10-year-old Ben, were enrolled. Concerned parents whispering friends' vultures from the media. The walls of the gilded cage she had lived in for 15 years suddenly felt like they were shrinking, the air growing thin. That evening, Genevieve sat in the kitchen of the townhouse she was now renting, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Her children were with her parents for the week, shielded from the immediate fallout, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they were hurt by the shrapnel of their parents' war. She was staring at the tablet, at the hateful article, when her lawyer called. "It's a classic smear campaign," Genevieve Robert Chen said, his voice calm and reassuring amidst the storm. "It's ugly, but it's predictable. It's what bullies do when they get scared. Don't read it. Don't engage. He's using our children's lives. Robert," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's turning our friends against me. He's twisting everything. We knew he would. Now we need to focus. They are going to attack the document on 2 fronts, the signature and the witness. Their handwriting expert will claim the signature is a masterful but detectable fake, and they will do everything in their power to discredit or silence the witness. We need to find Elias Foster before they do." The name hung in the air. Elias Foster, the kind-faced man who had witnessed their promise. He was pushed out of the company about 10 years ago, Genevieve recalled. Nathan said he was let go, that he'd made a series of bad investments with company funds, Nathan framed it as a betrayal. He was heartbroken, he said. She paused, a new sickening understanding dawning on her. Oh my God. He wasn't heartbroken. He was covering his tracks. Elias knew too much. Exactly, Chen said. Nathan would have made sure to discredit him long before he became a potential liability. He was probably forced to sign an ironclad NDA and given a severance package contingent on his silence. Finding him will be difficult. He'll be scared. Chen had already hired his own investigator, a discreet former detective named Frank, to begin the search. But Nathan's resources were limitless. It was a race. The next attack was more personal and far more cruel. A courier arrived at her door with a legal notice. Nathan was petitioning for an emergency hearing to gain sole custody of the children, citing her unstable and deceitful behavior as a danger to their well-being. The fraudulent prenup was Exhibit A in his filing. That was the blow that brought Genevieve to her knees. He was using their children as leverage, as pawns to be sacrificed. She curled up on the sofa, the legal document clutched in her hand. And for the first time since this began, she felt a wave of despair so profound it threatened to drown her. The calm resolve she had felt in the courtroom evaporated, replaced by raw, visceral fear. He wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to annihilate her, to erase her from her own life, from her children's lives. It was in that moment of darkness, huddled on the couch in a rented house, that her phone rang again. It was Sarah Jenkins. I just saw the custody filing. Sarah said, her voice filled with a cold fury. That absolute bastard. There was a pause. Jen, you listen to me. This is what he wants. He wants you to break. He wants you to crumble and give up, and he'll give you back your kids and a quiet life. Do you understand? It's a tactic. He's going to take my children. Genevieve sobbed. No, he's not. Sarah said, her voice hardening with purpose. We're not going to let him. The man has more skeletons in his closet than a cemetery. You fought back in that courtroom. Now you get up off that floor and you keep fighting. You find that witness. You prove that signature. You burn his empire to the ground if you have to. You wanted a war. You've got one. It's time to start dropping your own bombs. Sarah's words cut through the fear. She was right. This wasn't just about a prenup anymore. It was about survival. Genevieve wiped her tears, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. The despair was hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. Rage. Okay, she said, her voice low and steady. Okay, Sarah. What's the first target the Empire had struck back? Now the rebellion would begin. The search for Elias Foster was like hunting a ghost. Nathan had not just fired his former mentor, he had effectively erased him. Elias's name was scrubbed from Harrington Global's corporate history, his digital footprint all but vaporized. Frank Chen's investigator hit one dead end after another. The severance package would have included a non-disclosure agreement, so terrifying that Elias would have been afraid to even use his own name on a credit card application. Nathan didn't just want him gone. He wanted him to disappear. Frank reported to Chen and Genevieve in Chen's modest office. He likely forced him into a cash-out, making him untraceable through conventional financial means. Genevieve, however, had an advantage over the investigators. She had memory. For 15 years, she had been the repository for the small, insignificant details of Nathan's life. Details he himself had long forgotten. He used to talk about Elias all the time in the early years, she said, closing her eyes, forcing herself back into the memories of a happier time. He said Elias was the only person who could ever beat him at chess. He said Elias wasn't a businessman, but a craftsman. His passion wasn't money, it was structure, building things. He had a cabin somewhere. A cabin, Chen asked, leaning forward. Yes, somewhere upstate. In the Catskills, I think. Elias built it himself by hand. Nathan once scoffed that Elias would rather chop wood than close a deal. It was his sanctuary. Nathan gave him the land as a gift years before they parted ways. It was a tiny breadcrumb, but it was more than they'd had for days. The problem was that land records under Nathan's name were vast and often shielded by shell corporations. The gift, Genevieve said, her eyes snapping open. Nathan would have structured it as a bonus to minimize his tax liability. It would have been transferred from the company from Harrington Innovations directly to Elias Foster. It would have been before the big expansion when he formed Harrington Global. Chen was already typing furiously. This was a new vector, a specific corporate entity, and a specific time frame. Within an hour, they had it. A deed transfer from 2008. A 5-acre plot of unincorporated land in Sullivan County, gifted from Harrington Innovations to one Elias Foster. There was no official address, just a plot number in a densely wooded area near a town called Roscoe. That's him, Genevieve breathed. Frank will drive up there first thing in the morning, Chen said. He'll be discreet. We don't want to spook him. But they were already too late. The next day, Frank called Chen from a windy roadside turnout. He's been here, or his people have. The cabin is empty, but it was lived in recently. There's a cold pot of coffee on the stove. Mail from the last few days is on the table. But the man is gone. And a neighbor I spoke to, a guy down the road, said a black SUV with tinted windows was parked at the end of the driveway for most of yesterday afternoon. They left just before dark. Genevieve's blood ran cold. Nathan's team hadn't needed to search. They knew exactly where Elias was. They had gotten to him first. Did they threaten him? Pay him off? She asked, pacing her living room. Probably both, Chen said grimly. He's compromised now. Even if we find him, Corbyn's team will argue we coerced or bribed him. His credibility as a witness is shot. It was a devastating blow. Their key to authenticating the signature was gone. All they had was the document itself, which Nathan's army of experts was now publicly branding a high-tech forgery. The narrative was taking hold. Genevieve was the desperate, scheming wife. Nathan was the wronged, magnanimous husband. That night, unable to sleep, Genevieve found herself in the study of her rented home. She was unpacking the last few boxes from her old life, a painful archaeological dig through 15 years of marriage. She opened a heavy chest filled with old photo albums and memorabilia. There were pictures of her and Nathan young and smiling. Pictures of the children's first steps, their first birthdays, the life he was now trying to burn to the ground. Near the bottom was a leather-bound folio she hadn't opened in over a decade. It contained the artwork and letters from her academic life, the person she was before she became Mrs. Harrington. She pulled out a thick bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. They were from her correspondence with other historians, with museums, with auction houses. And then she saw it. Tucked within the bundle was an envelope made of familiar pale blue linen blend paper. Her heart stopped. It was a letter from Nathan. Not a romantic note, but a formal one from the earliest days of their courtship. He had written to her previous employer, the Soho Gallery, making a significant donation in her name to fund a research fellowship she had long dreamed of. It was a grand, controlling gesture, but one she had seen as romantic at the time. The letter was dated February 2010, just 3 months before they signed the prenup. And at the bottom was his signature, his full, proud, looping signature. She scrambled to find the prenup, which Chen had given her a high-quality copy of. She laid the copy next to the letter. She wasn't a handwriting expert, but even to her untrained eye, they were identical. The pressure of the pen, the unique flourish on the H, the precise spacing. It was him. But that wasn't the bomb. The bomb was the letterhead. At the top of the page, it didn't say Nathan Harrington. It said Harrington Innovations. And below that, Office of the CEO. He had written this official donation letter on the same personal stationery he had used for their private agreement. The stationery he claimed in his legal filings was for personal use only, and never for business, a key part of his argument that the prenup was an unofficial, non-binding document. This letter proved that was a lie. He used this paper for official binding financial correspondence. But there was more. She remembered something else, another detail buried by time. When he made the donation, the gallery, as a matter of protocol, had sent a formal acceptance letter back to him, acknowledging the gift and its terms. And she, as the beneficiary, had been copied on that letter. She frantically searched through another folder, this one filled with old professional documents. And there it was. A letter from the gallery director addressed to Mr. Nathan Harrington, Harrington Innovations. It began, "Thank you for your legally binding pledge of," and it referenced his letter by date. It was a third-party contemporaneous acknowledgement that a letter written on that very stationery was considered a binding legal document. Her hands were shaking. This was it. This was the proof. It wasn't as dramatic as a surprise witness, but in the cold, logical world of contract law, it was a guided missile. It didn't just authenticate the signature. It authenticated the very paper it was written on as a medium for his binding legal and financial promises. It eviscerated his entire defense. She called Robert Chen, her voice electric with excitement. "Robert, I have him. I have him cold." As she explained what she'd found, the quiet lawyer on the other end of the line was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, there was a new dangerous edge to his voice. An edge of a fighter who has just been handed the perfect weapon. "Genevieve," he said slowly, "don't touch those documents. Don't move them. I'm sending an independent courier to collect them and place them in a secure vault right now. The hearing is in 2 days. Mr. Corbin is about to have a very, very bad day." The atmosphere in Judge Thompson's courtroom for the second hearing was even more charged than the first. Nathan Harrington sat confidently flanked by a smug-looking Mr. Corbin and 2 junior lawyers. He had spent the week masterfully controlling the narrative. His team had submitted a voluminous report from a nationally renowned handwriting analyst who concluded with 99% certainty that the signature on the prenup was a masterful digital and chemical forgery. They had also submitted a sworn affidavit from a terrified Elias Foster, no doubt written by Nathan's lawyers, stating that he had never witnessed such a document and that his signature was also a forgery. Nathan's victory seemed not just likely, but inevitable. He caught Genevieve's eye as she entered and gave her a look of pity mixed with contempt. It was the look of a king banishing a courtier who had dared to displease him. The hearing began with Corbin laying out his case with theatrical flair. He called the prenup a pathetic fantasy and Genevieve's actions a stain on the sanctity of the marital contract. "We have provided irrefutable expert testimony." "Your Honor," Corbin declared, gesturing to his mountain of files, "the signature is fake. The witness has denied his involvement. There is simply nothing left to discuss other than the severe legal penalties Mrs. Harrington must now face for this attempted fraud." Judge Thompson looked over at Robert Chen. "Mr. Chen." "Your response." Chen stood calm as ever. "Your Honor, we do not need to rebut their experts' claims about the signature because we are not going to debate the signature's authenticity. We are going to prove it." He produced the letter Nathan had sent to the art gallery, sealed in a protective evidence bag. He presented it as Exhibit B, Your Honor. "This is a letter written by Mr. Harrington 3 months prior to the prenup on the exact same personal stationery. It is a letter in which he makes a substantial legally binding financial pledge. We have that signature, and we also have Exhibit C." He then produced the gallery's response, Exhibit US, which explicitly referred to Nathan's letter as a legally binding pledge. Mr. Harrington's entire case rests on the fiction that this stationery was for informal notes only, and that the prenup was therefore not a serious document, Chen explained, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "These documents prove that Mr. Harrington used this exact paper for official binding financial matters. His argument is a lie." He let the word hang in the air. "Lie." Corbin jumped to his feet, sputtering objections, but Judge Thompson waved him into silence. She was studying the new exhibits with intense interest. The trap had been sprung. Nathan's team had spent all their resources discrediting a signature, but Chen had just outflanked them by authenticating the paper itself. Nathan's face had lost its confident smirk. He was staring at the letter, a flicker of confusion and fury in his eyes. He had forgotten all about it. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Chen continued, pressing his advantage, "the existence of this correspondence, which we will have our own expert verify against the prenup, makes Mr. Foster's coerced affidavit irrelevant. The documentary evidence is clear." A murmur went through the courtroom. The tide had just turned swiftly and brutally. Judge Thompson looked at Corbin, her expression frosty. "Mr. Corbin, I am admitting these documents into evidence. I suggest you take a moment to confer with your client." It was a clear signal. The judge was not only accepting the evidence, she was believing it. But Genevieve knew this was only part of the battle. Proving the prenup was real was one thing. Proving infidelity was another. The tabloid stories had muddied the waters, making her own character suspect. Her evidence of his affairs, the dossiers she'd brought to the first hearing, could be dismissed as the vengeful work of a woman scorned. As the judge called for a brief recess, Genevieve leaned over to Chen. "It's not enough, Robert. They'll pivot. They'll admit the prenup is real, but argue that the infidelity clause hasn't been triggered. They'll say I'm the one who had the affair." Chen gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "That's what I'm counting on." He patted his briefcase. "There's one more thing about that prenup they've overlooked. Everyone, including you, Jen, has been focused on Clause 4B. She looked at him confused. "What else is there?" "There is an addendum," he said, lowering his voice. "Addendum 2, a clause that Nathan himself insisted on. A clause so specific and so strange that I think he forgot it was even in there. He was so focused on the main text, he never imagined it would ever come into play." He slid a copy of the prenup across the table to her, and pointed to the very last page. It was a short paragraph, written in Nathan's own hand, just above the signature lines. Addendum 2. In recognition of the complexities of life preceding this union, a private trust designated the Phoenix Trust shall be established and independently administered by a third party. In the event of dissolution, and upon confirmation of the fulfillment of pre-existing personal obligations by Mr. Harrington, control of this trust's administration and all its assets will transfer to Ms. Parker to ensure its continued and faithful execution, shielded from personal conflict. Genevieve read it twice. It was dense with legalese that Nathan had clearly written himself. Pre-existing personal obligations. The Phoenix Trust. I've never heard of this. What does it mean? I didn't know either, Chen admitted. So I had Frank, our investigator, stop looking for Elias Foster and start digging into this, into any private trusts established by Nathan around the time of your wedding. It took him a week of chasing shell corporations and offshore accounts, but he found it. Chen's eyes met hers. Genevieve, the pre-existing personal obligation is a child. The world tilted on its axis. A child, she whispered. A son, born a year before you met Nathan. His name is Leo. Nathan has kept him and his mother completely hidden. He set up this trust to provide for them, but the payments were contingent on the mother's absolute silence. He was terrified of a scandal derailing his rise to power. He put that clause in the prenup as a fail-safe. He figured if you ever divorced, he could prove he'd fulfilled his obligation by paying them off, and the matter would be closed. He never ever imagined that you would be the one put in charge of it. Genevieve felt a wave of nausea. A child, a whole secret life he had hidden from her for 15 years. The depth of the deception was staggering. It wasn't just about cheating. It was about a fundamental lie that sat at the very core of their life together. This clause, Chen explained, his voice precise, is our real weapon. Forget the infidelity for a moment. This is bigger. The existence of a secret child and a secret trust created to conceal him is the very definition of profound personal betrayal. It's a betrayal not just of you, but of the child himself. It proves a pattern of deceit that makes all his other claims worthless. And the beauty of it is the prenup he wrote himself gives you the key. It gives you control over the very secret he tried to bury. Genevieve looked across the courtroom at Nathan. He was deep in a furious, whispered conversation with Corbin, no doubt trying to figure out how to counter the gallery letter. He had no idea what was coming. He was fighting a battle on his western front, completely unaware that an army was about to crest the mountains to his east. The mother Genevieve said, her voice barely audible. "Where is she? Where is the boy?" "Her name is Catherine Powell," Chen said. "She lives in a quiet town in Connecticut. Frank has an address, and according to him, she stopped receiving her monthly payments from the trust 2 months ago, right around the time Nathan decided to divorce you. He was cutting off loose ends. She's scared, and she's angry." Genevieve's rage from the other night returned, but it was different now. It was cold, clear, and focused. This was no longer her fight alone. There was an innocent woman and a child who had been manipulated and discarded by the same man. "The recess is almost over," she said, her decision made. "When it's done, I want you to ask for another continuance." Chen looked surprised. "Genevieve, we have the advantage here. We need to do one more thing before we end this," she insisted, her gaze steely. "I'm going to Connecticut. I'm going to meet Catherine Powell. This isn't about his money anymore. It's about his victims. and he's not going to face just one of them in this courtroom. He's going to face us both. The drive to Connecticut was a journey into Nathan's secret past. Genevieve sat in the passenger seat of Robert Chen's car, the rolling green hills a blur outside the window. She had asked Chen to come with her, not just as her lawyer, but as a steadying presence. The woman she was about to meet was not an enemy or a rival. She was a fellow casualty. Catherine Powell lived in a modest but well-kept colonial house on a leafy street in a town that prided itself on its quiet anonymity. It was the kind of place a man like Nathan would choose to hide a secret, pleasant, unremarkable, and completely off the society page's radar. As they walked up the stone path, Genevieve's heart pounded. What would she say? How do you begin a conversation with the woman who shared a hidden history with your husband? The door opened before they could knock. A woman stood there, her face pale and etched with worry, but her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, were resolute. She was petite, with dark, curly hair tied back, and she held herself with a quiet dignity. This was Catherine Powell. "You must be Genevieve," she said. Her voice was soft but firm. "I've been expecting you. Please come in." The house was warm and lived in, filled with books and art supplies. Photos of a smiling, dark-haired boy were everywhere. Leo. He had Nathan's eyes. They sat in the living room, an awkward silence hanging between them. Chen, sensing this was a conversation that needed to happen without lawyers, excused himself to take a call in the garden. "My investigator said you'd stopped receiving payments," Genevieve began gently. Catherine gave a short, bitter laugh. "The day his lawyer served me with a new, much more restrictive non-disclosure agreement, the payments stopped. He wanted to ensure my silence before he filed for divorce from you. When I refused to sign it, he cut me off. He threatened to prove I was an unfit mother and take Leo from me. The same man who has seen his son a grand total of 5 times in his entire life. The parallels were chilling. He was using the same tactic on both of them. He told me you were a one-night stand." Genevieve confessed the words tasting like ash, a mistake he had to manage. Catherine's eyes flashed with a pain that was clearly still raw. "We were together for almost 2 years. I was a junior analyst at a bank that was helping to finance Harrington Innovations. He was brilliant, charming. You know the story. I fell in love with him. I thought he loved me. When I told him I was pregnant, he changed. It was all about the scandal, how it would ruin his public image, how it would destroy the company he was about to take public." She looked away toward a picture of her son, kicking a soccer ball. "He convinced me to walk away. He said it was the only way to guarantee a future for our child. He created the trust, the Phoenix Trust, he called it. So dramatic. He said it was about our son, rising from the ashes of our relationship. He made me promise to never contact him, to never reveal Leo's paternity. He said if I did, he would use his power to make sure I never saw my son again. I was young, and I was terrified. So I agreed. He put a clause about the trust in our prenuptial agreement," Genevieve said softly. Catherine looked at her, shocked. "He what?" "He never thought it would be found, or that the prenup would ever surface. And in it, he gave me. He gave his wife ultimate control over the trust in the event of a divorce." For a long moment, Catherine just stared at her. Then for the first time, a slow smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated irony. The sheer hubris of the man was almost comical. In his attempt to build a foolproof system of control, he had created the very mechanism of his own downfall. So the man who has spent 16 years trying to keep us apart has now legally bound our futures together, Catherine mused. Poetic. He is trying to take my children too, Genevieve said. He is painting me as an unstable, fraudulent monster in the press. He is trying to erase me, because we are the two people who know who he really is. Catherine said, her voice hardening. Behind the charm, behind the billions, he's a coward. He's terrified of anything he can't control. Of the truth. An understanding passed between the two women, solid and unspoken. They were not rivals. They were allies, forged in the fire of a common betrayal. They were the architects of his past and his present, and they would now be the architects of his future. His lawyer Corbyn is going to paint you as an extortionist, Genevieve warned her. He'll say you're colluding with me for a bigger payday. Let him try. Catherine said, her dignity a shield. I have 16 years of letters I wrote to Leo about his father, letters I never sent. I have the one photograph of Nathan holding him as a baby, a photograph his security team tried to confiscate. I have the original trust documents he made me sign. This isn't about money. It's about my son, knowing that his mother wasn't a shameful secret, and that his father is held accountable for his existence. They spent the next 2 hours planning. Catherine agreed to testify. She would not be a hostile witness dragged into court with a subpoena. She would walk in willingly as Genevieve's witness. Robert Chen joined them again. His legal mind carefully structuring Catherine's testimony to be factual, irrefutable, and devastating. As Genevieve and Chen were leaving, Catherine stopped Genevieve at the door. Genevieve, she said, her expression serious. When you get control of that trust, I don't want his money. I want his name. I want Leo to have the option to be recognized as a Harrington if he so chooses when he's older. That's all I've ever wanted. I'll do more than that. Genevieve promised, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. The prenup gives me 51% of Harrington Innovations, the foundational company. It's not about the money for me either. It's about the principle. And the principle is this, that company's success was built on a lie. Part of its legacy will now be securing the future of the son its founder tried to hide. They shook hands not as a formality, but as a pact. Driving back to New York, the setting sun casting long shadows across the highway, Genevieve felt a profound shift within herself. The fear and despair were gone, burned away by a righteous anger and a newfound purpose. Nathan had wanted her to be a still point in his turning world. Instead, she had become the force that was about to bring his world to a dead stop. He thought he was at war with the quiet, timid woman he had married. He had no idea he was now at war with the two women who held his entire history and his legacy in their hands. The final day in court was a fortress of arrogance on Nathan Harrington's side. His lawyers were confident his victory all but assured. They were prepared to swat away accusations of infidelity, like flies, unaware they were about to face a dragon. When Judge Thompson entered, Robert Chen rose. "Your Honor," he began, "we will now prove the profound personal betrayal that triggers this prenup. We call our witness Catherine Powell." The name meant nothing to Nathan's team, but as the courtroom doors opened and a composed, dark-haired woman walked in, Nathan's face turned to chalk. He knew this ghost. He understood in a blinding flash of terror that the game was over. Catherine took the stand. Chen's first question was a surgical strike. "Ms. Powell, could you please state your relationship to Mr. Harrington?" Her voice was clear and steady, cutting through the silence. "He is the father of my 16-year-old son." The words detonated in the courtroom. Gasps echoed as reporters scrambled. Corbin looked at his client, a man frozen in a state of living rigor mortis, and knew he had been checkmated. The carefully constructed narrative of a wronged husband was incinerated on the spot. Chen presented the evidence, the trust documents for the Phoenix Trust, the photograph of Nathan holding his infant son, the 16 years of concealed truth. It was an avalanche that buried Nathan's lies completely. Judge Thompson had seen enough. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She looked at the shell of the man at the defendant's table with utter contempt. "This court finds the prenuptial agreement authentic and binding," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "The testimony heard today proves a deceit so profound it is staggering. Therefore, the court orders the immediate enforcement of the agreement." She banged her gavel, each strike a nail in the coffin of Nathan's empire. 51% controlling interest in Harrington Innovations will be transferred to Mrs. Genevieve Harrington. Full control of the Phoenix Trust is hereby transferred to Mrs. Harrington, and this court will be notifying the district attorney's office regarding potential perjury. It was a total annihilation. Nathan sat broken as Genevieve rose. She walked past him not with triumph, but with quiet finality. She met Catherine, and the two women shared a look of solidarity, a silent pact between the two pillars of the truth he had tried to bury. As Genevieve walked out of the courthouse into the bright, flashing lights of a new life, she wasn't just a divorcee. She was a victor, a survivor who had used the truth as a weapon and reclaimed not just her fortune, but her soul. That was the incredible story of Genevieve Harrington, a woman who proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a masterclass in strategy, patience, and the unbreakable power of truth. It's a story about how the deepest betrayals often plant the seeds of their own destruction. Nathan Harrington built an empire on secrets, but he forgot that secrets have a shelf life, and the women he scorned became the arbiters of his fate. If this story of deception, resilience, and ultimate justice captivated you, and if you believe in the power of a single person to topple a giant, then please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you want more. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that strength comes in many forms. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most compelling real-life dramas every week, proving that sometimes the most shocking stories are the ones that are true. Click that bell so you never miss an update.